Hey everybody, welcome to the greatest hour of my week. I hope it's the greatest hour of your week too. Glad to be with you. And this week, we met last week already. We took a couple weeks off. We met last week, but this week we're kind of, we're going to start to have a certain kind of kavanah, a certain kind of intention as we study the parsha together, the Torah portion together. And it's with the approaching high holidays in mind that we're going to do this. We're in this period. We're not actually in Elul yet, which is the classical month of reflection and preparation for the 10 days of awe, which are the real heavy lifting. But we're not quite there yet. But we're sort of ushered into that by the Shiva Dinei Chamta, the 10 haftarot of consolation that are read after Tisha B'Av, the great day of mourning, and those take us right into the high holidays. So there is this sense in which we have entered this period where we're trying to experience, we're trying to get ourselves to some kind of place that isn't full of despair and emptiness. We're trying to fill ourselves with some kind of consciousness. Okay, so I want, well, maybe in that spirit, let's say a blessing over our study, our Torah study today. It ends in Lasok b'divrei Torah, a blessing for immersing ourselves in words of Torah, and we'll have a kavanah today that our Torah today will be a kind of spiritual preparation. Okay, so Baruch Atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay, so I wanna say, I sort of like in some opaque way described this idea of using the Torah to prepare for our study of the Torah, to prepare for tshuva, prepare for our spiritual work, prepare for our holidays, prepare for this encounter. But I want to give a little bit. Those are sort of spiritual, poetic descriptions. I want to give a little bit of a formal language to what I'm talking about. I used to teach teachers. That was what I did before I came to Ikar. I would teach people how to teach Torah, and one of the theories that I really leaned on was a guy named Barry Holtz, professor of education at JTS, has this essay. Actually, I'll give it to you. First of all, I want to share it, but I'll give it to you as well. Let's see if I can get it here. And he talks about different ways. He talks about teaching orientations. That's the language he uses, teaching orientations, which is very kind of like academic, kind of dry language, to talk about this concept, which is not dry at all, which is that the Torah in particular is a text. Here's the essay, and let me just share the part that we're going to look at because it's a long essay. You can read it later. But the Torah in particular, it's a book we all know that can and should be read on multiple levels. The tradition itself asks us to read the Torah on 4 levels of interpretation, secret levels and revealed levels and all these things. And here is a more academic kind of presentation of the same idea. So many orientations, many ways of looking at the Torah. So some of you really enjoy reading it in a contextual, well, he calls it a contextual orientation. So the Bible in the context of its own times, right? Like, how would people in biblical times have understood these texts? What can the ancient Near Eastern context teach us about understanding them, right? That's an orientation. I tend more towards the literary criticism orientation, the tools of modern and postmodern literary criticism applied to the Bible. That is like how the Bible is a genre of literature. Like, how do we read it? How does it present itself as a work of literature? And we can, and then I have also spent a lot of time on this third orientation, parshanut, the Jewish interpretive orientation, meaning let's go see what Rashi says. Let's go see what the commentators say. Let's go see what the Talmud said about this verse. Okay, and he goes on and on and on. Personalization, ideational. There's lots of interesting orientations, but it's the fourth that I think we're taking up today, the moralistic didactic orientation. And I have to say, I don't like those words. Feel very very didactic indeed. Like that's a little heavy. But the idea, exploring the Bible, the Torah, as a source of moral lessons, right? What is the questions to explore he gives here are, what is the moral lesson that the Bible teaches us? What's the message of the text? How do I sum up a text's message and meaning? Okay, and that's the way I want us to read, at least for today's session, is to ask ourselves, what does, and you know, we live in this liberal world of choices, and we know that we don't actually have to do what the Torah says, right? We have our choices, and very often we challenge what the Torah says. Very often we don't like what the Torah says. That's the kind of postmodern reality we're in. But nevertheless, I think it is valuable for us all to at least ask the question sometimes, what might the Torah be wanting from me? What does she have to teach me? How might I guide myself morally? How might I learn to be a better person from the Torah, right? It's a pretty classic orientation. So that's what I want to do with you all today. So let me tell you, when I look at the Parsha this week, let me tell you what I noticed because of what I'm working through in my life, as I prepare for the high holidays. And it's a topic that I think is big enough that we can all think about it and share in it. So I'm thinking about my meat consumption a lot. And I have to say, I'm not a philosophical vegetarian, really. I've never had a problem with the concept of eating animals ethically, although some people do, and that can be a part of the conversation, of course. But I do feel increasingly like it isn't the way that we eat meat and factory farming and just the resource depletion, that the participating in kind of agribusiness, right? In the meat, in the animal realm, you call that agribusiness, or is it something else when it's animals? I think you kind of do. But anyway, I'm not sure. I'm a little uncomfortable. I don't know how to think about that. So I'm just thinking about my meat eating lately. And should I change? Should I eat no meat? Like, I'm not sure. And it's the first time in my life I'll be 44 next week. And it's the first time I've really taken seriously the idea like, ooh, I really should cut back on meat. So let me ask you this. Let's start here. We're going to go into the Torah. This week's Torah portion has a lot to say about eating. But let me ask you, what do you think the Torah's position is? Just your gut or your sense or your memory. What's the Torah's position on eating meat? Anybody want to like review that for us, or guess out loud, or Yonatan?
Well, I'm very biased on this one, as somebody who's been a vegetarian for a very long time. Okay. And I'm a fan of Rabbi Kook's great treatise, The Vision of Vegetarianism in Peace, where he argues that the Torah basically allows meat eating as a concession to the weakness of humankind, but that hints at the fact that we should not be eating meat. Okay. Now, do you have any, like, do you have any sense of where that's messaged? Like this idea that like it is allowed, but it's a weakness? I mean, the biggest reference to it is the flood, right? And that we really only began to eat meat as an aftermath of the flood, and the cannibalism that preceded the flood. Good.
Okay. Oh, interesting. That's like midrash, the cannibalism that preceded. But yes, in some way, we must, when we think about eating meat, we must remember that the Torah's own narrative says very clearly, very early on, you can have all these plants, eat all the plants you want, all the seeds you want.
But only certain.
but doesn't seem to indicate that we would eat animals. And then it's only after the flood that God says to Noah, you can now partake of animals, right? Any animal, but it's, but it has to be pure animals. So that's interesting. And it seems like many ways to read that. One way is that like Noah earned the right to eat animals by saving them all, right? Sort of ideological explanation. But Yonatan says there's some kind of like chaos. I'm adding, but like you can imagine that this was just a chaotic time and everything was just, there was devastation. It was a concession, in other words, a concession to just like what people needed in that moment. Okay, so that might be a kind of a starting point for framing how we think about, we weren't supposed to originally eat meat, then we were allowed to eat meat. Is that an ideal? Is it a concession? Is it, okay, how?
Well, on the other hand, you have a lot of attention to burnt offerings and sacrifice, which is basically a kind of potlatch and sharing of meat. And to put on my contextual hat, which is the one I like to wear in these discussions, you're talking about two basic agricultural economies, pastoral economy, and then, farming crops. And the pastoral economy is all about eating meat, because that's their livelihood. So I don't know. Yeah.
Good.
I thought
Good. Oh, tag team.
Sorry, I thought he was going to say.
It's okay when you have two scholars in one house. Share the Zoom.
I thought he was going to say that the contextual part was his smoker, his new smoker.
Oh no.
But anyway. Okay.
Right. Okay. Good. So wonderful. Actually, that's relevant because there is a kind of a barbecue. There's a barbecue theme that also runs through the Torah.
Yeah.
Hal's absolutely right to say that this is also it doesn't seem like such a, oh, poor human beings, they have to eat meat. Meat seems to be celebrated and offered to God. That it's sanctified, the eating of meat in some way, because as you offer to God, you eat. Some of those sacrifices are consumed entirely, the olah, but some of them you partake, you eat. It's a sacred act. And that also goes all the way back, not all the way back to the Garden of Eden, but pretty close, because Abel offered sheep up to God, right? And God found favor in that, as God will later find favor in the offerings. So this seems like actually maybe there's something, I don't know. Is that all just like is it a different system? Is that not about food? Well, so the Torah does not just allow meat, but sanctify it. Okay, great. I'm going to take one more comment, and then we're going to get into our text. Susan?
Yeah, but it's within limitations. You can't eat all the parts, and you can't eat all the kinds. And so there's already a story about, well, and why is that?
Okay, this is so great. This group is so sharp. I mean, these are all the points that we need to make. And it's just like, it's like, this is why lectures are not good. Like, imagine if I just was talking this entire time and said all these things. That's not interesting. These, like, look at the wisdom in the group. That's exactly right. And then on top of all of that, there's the obvious, what is the obvious Jewish food paradigm? Kashrut, keeping kosher. So you get to, you first don't get to eat meat, then you get to eat meat, then you limit the meat that you get to eat. You can't just eat anything. And that actually is the ethical, moral, didactic paradigm that I have lived my eating life around for the last, 20 years, 25 years. So, okay, now that's great. This is like brilliant group. We have all the pieces in place. But then I noticed this week as I was reading through the Torah portion that there's a very in-depth discussion of specifically what I'm wondering about, not just eating, but eating meat. Okay, so that's what we're going to look at today, and we're going to try and ask this question: what does the Torah want from us here? What is the Torah's? Afterwards, we can also ask the question: do we want what the Torah wants? Yes, we can ask that too. But for now, somebody asked me to send the Holtz delineation chart, and I sent it in the. It's in that essay that I sent up above, Ruth. Let's see. And here's the source sheet for today. I'm going to resend that thing in case you didn't see it earlier. Here's the Holtz, which you can look at later. Okay. Oh, sorry. Now you see where that is? Anyway, here we go. We're going to go into our source sheet for today. Okay. So looking at the Torah as a tool for tshuva, take a look now at this passage in our parsha this week, Parshat Re'eh. Ki yarchiv Hashem Elokecha et gvulcha kasher diber lach. When the Eternal One enlarges your territory, as God has promised you, or said to you, and you say, I shall eat some meat. V'amarta uchla basar. I'll eat some meat. Ki ta'aveh nafshecha. Now, we've already gotten some interesting facts, right? When God enlarges your territory, and then suddenly you say, why do you say this all of a sudden? So, something to think about. But you say, I will eat meat. And why? Ki ta'aveh nafshecha. Because you have the urge. Now, the word here is urge, translated as urge. The word is ta'ava, which is often translated as temptation. Taiva, your taivas in Yiddish, right? Or desire. Okay? Interesting language there. You say, I shall eat some meat because you have the urge to eat meat. Now listen to this language. Ki ta'ava nafshecha le'chol basar. You have the urge to eat meat. B'chol avat nafshecha tochal basar. Okay. As much as you have the desire to eat meat, eat meat. Now, I must say, when I read this, at first I thought it was saying, for all, b'chol avat nafshecha, with all of your desire, you should eat meat. Like, I first read it almost like if it was saying, anytime you have desire, eat meat instead. But I don't think that's right, and none of the translations go that way, right? But just like, this word is very prominent. B'chol avat, same language here. The ta'ava, your desire, with all of your desire, although I guess they're translating it as, and is probably correct, to the extent of your desire. B'chol avat nafshecha tochal basar. Okay? So that's the biggest statement here. When you get to Israel, all of Deuteronomy is talking about going to Israel, and you get to this place and you expand your borders, and then suddenly you say, I will eat some meat. Because you have a desire to eat meat, well then eat as much as you want. Barbecue, right? Okay, let's just read the rest of the passage and then, but that's the strong statement. Okay, if the place where the Eternal has chosen to establish God's name is too far from you, and this here, the place where the Eternal has chosen to establish God's name, that is seen by the rabbis as a reference to the Beit HaMikdash, to the eventual building of the temple. Right? There's a central place where you presumably make offerings. But if it's too far from you, you may slaughter any of the cattle or sheep that the Eternal gives you, as I have instructed you, and you may eat to your heart's content in your settlements. Right? So that's interesting too. The verse seems to suggest if you're close to the temple, go, I don't know, make an offering and eat part of it there. But if you're not, you can just slaughter your animals and eat them. Interesting. Like, I'm not sure exactly what's going on there. Interesting. This line I don't understand at all. This 22. Ach kasher ye'achel et hatzvi ve'et ha'ayal ken tochlenu hatameh v'hatahor yachdav yochlenu. Eat it, however, as the gazelle and the deer are eaten, the unclean may eat it together with the clean. It's like it's a little strange, like, it's actually, again, when I first read this, it reads to me like, hatameh v'hatahor yachdav yochlenu, sounds to me like you should eat clean and unclean things together. But that doesn't make sense that the Torah be saying that. So it's translated as, those who are in a state of purity and those who are not in a state of purity, both may eat these things. There's a way of eating these things, but you eat them the way that they are supposed to be slaughtered. I don't know exactly how to translate that. But make sure that you, and now this is interesting too, make sure that you do not partake of the blood though. For the blood is the life. And I would translate, it's the, ki adam hu hanafesh. Okay? This is the same word that we saw up here, that it was a temptation of your nefesh, a desire of your nefesh, of your soul. There's that word here, we sometimes translate it soul. We sometimes translate it, it's being translated here, and it's better as life, but I would translate it as life force. The blood is the life force. Lo tochal hanefesh im habasar. So don't eat the life force with the flesh. Interesting. Don't eat the life force with the flesh. You must not partake of it. You must pour it out on the ground like water. You must not partake of it in order that it may go well with you and your descendants to come, for you will be doing what is right in the sight of the eternal. It's like a big statement. For not eating blood, everything will go well and you'll be doing the right thing. That's a moralistic? Yes. Right? Okay. And then finally, but such sacred and votive donations, these are not a great translation, but the things that you sacrifice or you pledge by a vow to give to God, you have to take those to that site. You do have to, like when you make an offering, you can't do that anywhere. That's really important to the Torah. You shall offer your burnt offerings, both the flesh and the blood, on the altar of the eternal your God. And of your other burnt offerings are the ones you don't eat. And of your other sacrifices, the blood shall be poured out on the altar of the eternal your God, and you shall eat the flesh. Okay. So tell me, what's the Torah's agenda here? What does the Torah want? Is the Torah really psyched about eating meat? Is it actually the opposite of what I thought the Torah loves? Barbecue. Eat as much as you want. Yay. Go on. I have to tell you, by the way, that is the vibe that I encountered when I went to go live on the Upper West Side and in the modern Orthodox community in New York. I went to rabbinical school. And it's so interesting, like every time, like first of all, the East Coast is a different culture than the West Coast. I was raised on the West Coast. But like they would serve like Shabbat, and they would like serve the platter of like beef. And I was like a yeshiva boy. So like with yeshiva bachrim around the table, guys would be like, basar, yeah, bring it in. Feed me, put it in my mouth. It was like weird. They would like celebrate eating meat, as many people do, right? But I was like, it was so uncharacteristic because like these like effete little, pudgy Jewish lads, but they are basar. I have a theory about it, by the way. This is a tangent. But I realized later, like these are people who are not probably doing a lot of drugs and sleeping around. Like this is their taiva. This is like, this is their vice. This is their vice. So is that what the Torah's allowing for? Like what's going on here, right? Okay, Marlene.
Well, it doesn't say that you have to eat meat. It just says if you choose to eat meat, you have all these restrictions, so you have to really make a choice. Right. And it seems like they're putting the Torah is putting the responsibility on us to decide if this is something we want to do or not. Even though at the end it says you shall eat it. That's kind of, if you get to that point, you shall only eat the flesh. Yeah,
this is great. And what's also great about that comment is that there's a lot of language here of key. This word key it can mean if, it can mean when. Famously, in the appointment of the king, it says if or when you get to the land, ki tavo el haaretz, that God will give you, right? And you say v'amarta, same language here, v'amarta, som tasim alecha melech. If you say you want a king, then you can have a king. The tradition's a little unsure whether it's telling you to or just saying, very much as Marlene is saying here, yeah, this is an allowance. It is true that if you really want a king, then you can have a king. Maybe the Torah doesn't want you to have a king. Similarly, it is true that the Torah allows you to eat meat. Does the Torah want you to eat meat? Not clear, not clear. And maybe the language actually suggests that you only eat meat if you want to. It's not that God wants you to, right? Okay, so lots to say there. Okay, who else? Let me look for who's got hand. Nicholas Lassarelli.
Hey, yeah, Jamie and I were actually puzzling over this earlier, like this particular passage, because at first at first it seems to say like, wait, so at first it was like, are we, since like the place that God establishes to do sacrifices is too far, does that mean that like, okay, if it's too far, you can do it wherever you are, and it's still a sacrifice, but then we're changing the status of the food of like, you know, holy to not holy, so the impure and the pure can eat together. But it almost actually, I think that was just sort of like a misunderstanding on my part, but it seems to me that it's saying like, okay, like this technically isn't like a sacrifice, but when you're eating meat, there's still a way to go about it. And I want to remind you that you have to go about it this way.
Oh, very, very nice. Very, very nice. The idea here is that you should, yeah, you'll be able to eat. It would be such a tircha, such a schlep to have to always go to the temple anytime you wanted some meat. You can eat meat. You can eat meat like a regular person, but like it's still a sacred thing. And you got to eat it in a sacred way. Right? Yeah, you'll eat it in a state of impurity sometimes. You don't always have to be pure to eat it, but like still eat it the right way. The animal has to be shechted in the correct way. It can't suffer pain. You have to eat kosher animal. Like everything there's a certain sanctity to meat. Remember that. Right? I like that interpretation. I also, since you mentioned the expansion of the borders, right? That was an interesting, it's all introduced in this really interesting way. Like when is God expanding your borders and what's going on there? Like, so Rashi picks up on this question, Rashi, the most famous of the medieval commentators. And Rashi says, and I was like, what does that mean? And I looked over, Rashi has the same question. Limdat Torah derech eretz. The Torah teaches, well, the proper rule of life, ethics. The Torah is teaching you a piece of wisdom here, that one should not desire to eat flesh unless he lives amidst abundance and wealth. That's not a great translation. It should say one does not desire to eat flesh until one lives amongst until one gets to this like place of abundance. All right, that's interesting. Like suddenly you have a lot of money and you're like, ooh, like I need a steak. I need a steak tonight. I'm rich. I need a steak. You know, that's the idea. So that's interesting. I'm not sure that that's the idea, but Rashi is picking up on this question. Like, why is it about expanding your borders? Why is it about getting into the land and like feeling settled and conquered and all the, you know? Okay. Rashi also, by the way, says another interesting thing that's just worth mentioning here. On the same verse, Rashi says, "This you may eat flesh in every longing of your soul." Right? Like eat as much flesh as you want. This is Rashi's answer to the question we're trying to figure out. Is Rashi says, in the wilderness, the flesh of a non-holy animal was forbidden to them as food, unless one first dedicated it to the altar and offered it as a peace offering. In other words, made it a holy thing. So Rashi understands this to mean like they didn't just eat meat in the desert. No, they ate manna. That's what they ate. That's all they ate. They didn't have a hamburger every night, but they would eat the part they had offerings in the desert. So they actually ate manna and meat, but only in sacred ways. Now you're getting permission to do something else. Okay. Saw some other hands out there. Lila.
I guess to go back to the beginning, like if we're wondering, you know, the way that we today might ask ourselves, like, should I eat meat or not? Like, I think we can say at the very least from this passage, like, there is a question to be asked. Like, there is a conversation to be had. It's not a given, like, the Torah is not saying, like, listen, if you're in the mood to drink water, you know, because there's nothing there. But, like, if you want to eat meat, it's like, oh, we need to take pause here in some way, right? And then I feel like it sets it up as this kind of like, you know, like eat it whenever you want. And then you're sort of like, what's the catch, you know? And then it's like, yeah, okay, so there's gonna be, like, it's a lot of effort, you know, to drain the blood and the parts you're not supposed to eat and then make this sacrifice. So it's like, I don't know. It's like, yeah, sure, do whatever you want. Also, like, we're going to make this a little challenging for you, so that some people might be like, maybe it's not worth the effort.
Okay. Okay. I like that. That's an important theory of Jewish law, actually, to enter into our conversation here. This idea that what the Torah in part wants by giving you rules and regulations is to contain yourself a little bit. So Lila's first point is also, I think, very sophisticated read there. It's a way of saying, since the Torah even raises the question, problematizes it, you can assume it's not a given that the Torah wants you eating meat. So but this other thing that you said, that the rules are, you're gonna have to do a bunch of things. Like, there's a way in which that reminds you that it's not just like running around the world consuming things. Like, you have to be disciplined to contain, I don't know why, to contain your desire, to just remind you, to just not go too far. But like, a lot of there are theories of Jewish law that are this way, like, you work, but you have to take a day off, right? Like, you have to restrict it. You eat, but you don't eat every animal. Like, is there a logic to it? I'm not sure, but the logic is you just don't eat every animal, right? You have sex. Sex is great in Judaism. You can't have sex with everybody, right? You can have sex with your mother, right? Like, okay, there are rules here, right? There's a certain theory of what the rules are for. Yeah, so appreciate that. Okay, let's see here. Yonatan, I think, has hand up. Yonatan.
Yeah, I want to speak to the question you had about the translation of the gazelle and the deer. I think what's going on here is that this is a reference to the covering of the blood. So with the commandment, it's a Levitical commandment that says when you kill a wild animal as opposed to a domestic animal, you are to spill its blood on the ground and then cover it with dirt, right? And I think that's what's going on here, is that they're saying, yes, the Torah is saying you're slaughtering these animals that are domestic animals, but you should treat them as if they were wild animals. And the significance here, I mean, again, I'm going to go back to Rabbi Cook's vision of vegetarianism and peace. I think this is a commandment that imparts shame, or that communicates shame. That, like, we don't cover things unless we're embarrassed of what we did, and that it reflects that, like, we understand we shouldn't be killing these animals. That's why we cover their blood.
Interesting. That's interesting. But aren't both these animals kosher? Let's see in the ayah.
Sure. I mean, so in Torah Judaism, I'm not talking about rabbinic Judaism, but in Torah Judaism, you can hunt animals. There are kosher game animals. In rabbinic Judaism, that becomes very difficult because you can't really shecht a wild animal unless you ensnare it. But they're wild and they're kosher, but you would still do a covering of the blood if you were to hunt them.
That's interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. And I think you're right that there's a lot of sensitivity around the pouring of the blood that may be a reference to that. I mean, I also think that the tzvi is a kosher animal that is not offered up on the altar. The ayal is a kosher animal that is offered up on the altar. So I feel like the parallelism in that verse is like tamei but consumable, tahor but consumable. Interesting. Okay, great. So we got theories on that verse. Okay, now we're sitting here trying to figure out, like, does the Torah want us to eat meat or not? I think I'm hearing that the Torah from the group, that the Torah wants us to be at least mindful of it, perhaps bounded around it, perhaps sanctifying as we do it, and perhaps considering that maybe we don't need to do it. Maybe we don't need to eat meat, right? Like, we've had all this range of suggestions on the table, which is interesting because the Torah, what the Torah actually said was like, eat as much meat as your heart desires, right? So we haven't we haven't really taken why. I mean, that's such a strong statement. Isn't there someone who believes that means like meat is awesome, eat as much as you want, it is delicious? Anyone? No, I'm shaking heads here. Lee, do you have a thought?
Yeah, maybe. So I kind of like the idea that this might point to meat being a delicacy. As someone who is a vegetarian, I personally acknowledge that meat can be delicious. So, in the context of when you expand your lands, meat to your heart's desire, it makes me think of like a celebration of some kind.
Yeah.
And this actually kind of ties into, I was doing another study about kashrut with some family and friends yesterday, and we were reading about how Maimonides says kashrut is good because it encourages moderation, and the idea that maybe like eat meat in this special circumstance when you've expanded land. I don't know what the historical context for this is. Maybe it had to do with like capturing parts of Judea and Samaria, but it makes me think that it's like something special, but not something to be like, there's a condition on it. You only do it when you have a cause for celebration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that. That makes sense and ties into the, sure, it says eat everything you want, but all this talk about sacrifices, doing it like the sacrifices, we sort of covered this before. Remember that one of the sacrifices is called chagiga, like a celebratory sacrifice. There's something about the sacrifices, it's sacred, sometimes it atones for you, it can do a lot of things, but one of the things that a sacrifice is like a huzzah, our Lord, this is so great, this religion, here, God, thank you for everything, barbecue. Like that's part of that's the vibe. So, and I like what Lee is saying is, even as a vegetarian, recognizing there's something like, it's amazing to eat meat. It can be, and some people don't like it, but like, what a privilege. Like you get to actually eat another animal's flesh and it's delicious. And that's part of the way the world works. But like, take stock, like, hold on, that's for special occasions, right? That's a delicacy, that's a big deal. Okay.
Yeah, hi, sorry. Hi, yeah, it also reminds me what you were saying about the lifeblood, and that's like the thing that you can't eat. And so like, even when you're allowed to indulge, there's like that little bit that's like the lifeblood, like it's like the soul, the thing that like God gave this animal that you're not allowed to eat. And there's almost like a recognition of like how similar we are in that way by not being allowed to eat that.
Love that. Beautiful connection. Yeah, great. Let's see. Kathy. Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. Can I just come to you next? I now see a hand I haven't called on yet. Alexandra.
Hi, thank you. I love kashrut for so many reasons, like the way that the sanctity of life overlaps with the physiological reasons, I think are just amazing. Like the lifeblood is where all the hormones and all the toxins, that's what's it's all carried through that. And also acknowledging the sanctity of the life as well. And perhaps another read on why do we cover the dirt and blood is a nod to a burial and acknowledging the sanctity of the life that we have just slaughtered and are going to eat. Temple Grandin, she writes about slaughterhouses in the US, and she visited like one of those kosher houses that's not kosher, people are villains, but she also visited one that's practiced correctly, and she like writes about it in this like mystical way, which is surprising because it's uncharacteristic of her. And she said like the people there don't become inured to death, and the animals are calm and it's peaceful. And she had like a beautiful spiritual experience being there, which for her is like very out of character. And so I just think it's so, I feel like so honored to have like kashrut in our religion. I just love it.
Great, thank you.
I could talk about this forever.
Thank you so much for that, because that is a beautiful paradigm that might be, as I sit here and think like, what does the Torah want from me? That might be one way to think about it, which is that the Torah wants me to keep kosher. Like keep kosher, do all the things, follow all the rules. But what's important is the point of those rules is to just respect the the gravity of the thing that you've done. You took a life here. Like, do you have, this feels to me like kind of Disney-fied and fetishistic kind of like depiction of Native Americans, but I'm just going to reference it anyway, because you have some image in your mind from like a movie or something of like a Native American killing an animal and then sitting and kind of like, and I'm sure this is true in some, I just don't know enough about like what I'm referencing, but just the concept that like hunting an animal and then sitting alongside it and thanking the animal for its life, right? I'm not sure what tradition exactly that is, but I think we have probably some cultural memory of that idea. And Alexandra's suggesting that's in our primal kind of tradition as well. Like that's in our ethical system as well. So this is all about being really conscious, and therefore, and I think Alexandra was saying, there's kosher that isn't really kosher, because if the animals are not being, if we're not conscious in that way, you miss the whole point. Now you have to keep kosher, but you have to keep it with that consciousness. And if you're not, like, if you go to a kosher slaughterhouse and the animals are like hoisted up and screaming and, and there's just like, then that's not kosher, as Alexandra is suggesting it. And I think there's a lot of power to that. Kathy.
So one thing is, there's actually this great article about Native Americans and sort of killing bears in the colonial period. Anyway, I'll try to find the reference for you. But I'm not gonna like say meat is a great thing, especially in this crowd. But sort of along some of those lines, though, I wanted to ask how it fits in that God finds the cooking of meat as being such a pleasant odor. There's so much stuff about how God thinks this is such a great
Reach nichoach l'Hashem. It's like a classic phrase in the Torah, especially in Leviticus. A pleasant smell before God. Yeah. Okay.
So then my question is, so why does God love the smell of cooking meat or barbecuing, so much? And I guess it also makes me wonder, like, does God eat? I don't even know if God eats or if angels eat or, like what? Okay.
I do. God doesn't eat. So that's a metaphor. Right. Clearly, God isn't like actually enjoying barbecue. Imagine God with like the apron and everything. No, but it's a metaphor for something, and it's metaphor using language that clearly is meant to evoke something in us. Like, how it is to smell meat.
Right. Well, but then the other way that I go is actually a kind of an Ikar thing too, is that, so is this God loving the smell of meat, like instead of eating meat? In other words, that what's really wonderful is the smell of it, and that you can smell it, but that eating it is beyond the pale. And I think of that citron that you pass around on Yom Kippur at Ikar with cloves in it, and you smell it because you can't eat. And everybody smell, because it's almost like the smelling becomes a substitute for eating.
Yeah.
So, and that it,
really interesting.
So anyway, but that's
really interesting.
Why does God smell?
I don't know fully where to take that, but it's really, there's a whole separate kind of dialogue we could have here about like the role of smell and scent, and because the word for smell, reach, is very similar and related to the word for spirit, ruach, right? So there's something like, because they're both a spirit, air, right? So yeah, that's interesting. I think we're gonna have to leave that. It's really interesting, but we have to leave it aside. But I think what I want to hold on to from your comments is this idea that maybe you suggested it's the smell is so powerful we don't even actually eat because God smells the meat. Even if you imagine God actually enjoying the barbecue, it's the scent rather than the consuming. So that's interesting. But I'm more in some ways interested by the idea that we smell meat and it does evoke something, like it's biological, right? Like there's animals eat meat. Like there's some sort of there's some kind of visceral experience. I mean, I have to say, like, as someone who's not an ethical vegetarian, that's part of what I think. I think, like, it's the natural way. Creatures eat creatures. We're just meant to. The Torah is expressing that when it starts talking. But I'm not imposing that. That's just my theory of mine. So that's why I'm like tuned into to what you said there, Kathy. Okay, I want to, before we close, I saw a hand go up before I started. Lila?
Yeah, sorry, I interrupted you, but I just think, like, you know, the question that you started us off with, like, if we are, and sorry about the dog in someone else's apartment, if we're in the, like, moralistic, didactic vein, and we're coming from, like, a, you know, listen, like, we're not there anymore. Like, we are free individuals. We're in the postmodern world. We believe we can do whatever we want. I think for this, it's like this odd, like, we have to go stronger, harder, stricter than the Torah. Like, in this case, like, I think that's our impulse here. So, you know, don't murder. Like, we're not going to be like, listen, Torah, like, you don't get our context. We go around murdering people here. So, like, we're saying, like, the Torah absolutely, in my opinion, at least looking at this, like, cannot speak to what the contemporary world looks like the industrial farming complex, whatever you want to call it, the ways that our environment are on the, you know, brink of collapse. I mean, so you're dealing, I think it's interesting to look at the underlying kind of, like, moral and philosophical, but I think what we're saying is not, should we do whatever we want, but should we take this a step or a many steps further, and say, like, there are serious limitations when it comes to context here.
Yeah. There's this whole concept in Jewish law of lifnim mirishut hadin, going beyond the letter of the law. Like, the Ramban, Nachmanides, famously says that a person can certainly be a navel birshut Torah, like a scoundrel in the boundaries of the Torah. Like, you can be a kind of a rotten person, but be following all the law. Like, that's not the goal here. The goal is, like, as you said, like, what's the Torah trying to teach me? I mean, that's like, this isn't a law. I know what the kosher laws is, but what's the Torah actually saying here? And am I really supposed to say, like, the Torah is like, all right, listen, you can eat meat if you want to. And I should say, okay, cool, I will then. That sounds great. Yep. No, like, maybe I'm supposed to hear that the Torah is like, it's really not my ideal for you. It's really not. Yonatan, is your hand from before or raised?
It's raised, but there's people ahead of me in line.
Oh, I don't know. Oh, there we are. Sorry, Wendy. You know these screens. Wendy, hello.
You know, a couple things. I think, Kathy, what you brought up, it really struck me even more, because so much of what we talk about with sacrifice, it is about a pleasing odor. Sacrifice, that there's an element that always involves, it's a pleasing odor to God, the perfume. And it made me think about the fact that our olfactory sense, our sense of smell, is the strongest memory sense that we have. We can remember smells from our childhood, from our past, and as soon as we smell it, it will take us back to that. More than our sight, more than our hearing, more than anything. So there's something, I think, maybe there's something, and it's not just that God is smelling it, is that we are, and that act stays with us even deeper. Maybe. The other thing that I thought about is, you know, it's interesting. I think that eating is a very holy act. Obviously, what we ingest in our system is so important that Torah really goes into it. But I don't see in Torah, maybe I don't know, they say, okay, now you must eat the spinach leaves with the potato at the same time. And they must be, I don't know that there are laws about eating fruits and vegetables in a certain specific way. They're there for us. This is something that's a kind of subpart. If we need to eat this, this is what it needs to be. Yeah. But fruits and vegetables, this is what our sustenance, this is our everyday, what we bring into our body.
Really interesting. Yeah, you know, I want to take some of those comments and use it to look at just a last couple of texts here, because you talked about the way that the smell might be evocative, that we might be actually be thinking about, what is it? I don't know, something earlier, some hearkening back, you know? And as I was thinking, you know, as we were talking, I was thinking, yeah, I mean, I think that the script, all of Deuteronomy, in a sense, is meant to be evocative. Like the language here, we have to think about how it might be referencing earlier sections in the Torah, like, because this is a kind of a review. So like, so I started to think to myself, oh, this language here that is so prominent in our passage of taiva, right? This language of like, you have a ta'aveh here, a taiva, to eat basar b'chol avat nafshecha, all of the desire of your heart, right? Here it is again, b'chol avat nafshecha. Like it's very prominent here. So where, I thought to myself, where is that word? Like, what's that word? Where do we see that word? Anyone know where we see it first?
Shema.
No. Earlier.
Eden.
Garden of Eden. Very good. Very good. Yeah. Gold star. In Eden, we encountered this word around the eating of the apple, right? When the woman saw that the tree was good for eating and a delight, here it's translated as a delight. That's a much nicer translation, right? It's good for eating, the tree was good for eating, and that it was a delight to the eyes, or a desire to the eyes, or, right, like we translated it differently in different places. It was desirable as a source of wisdom. The nechma etz lahaskil, and it was desirable as a source of wisdom. And she took its fruit and ate, and she also gave some to her man, and he ate. Okay, that's interesting. But let me give you some more. There's another famous use of ta'ava in the Torah, and it's in the book of Numbers. I love this translation, the riffraff. V'hasafsuf, right? The riffraff. It's a great translation. V'hasafsuf. It's great because it keeps the onomatopoeia of it, but also yeah, that's what the meaning here, the extra, the asafsuf. The riffraff in their midst felt a craving. Hitavu ta'ava. They felt, I should have bolded this. They felt a gluttonous craving. And what did they say? And then the Israelites wept and said, if only we had meat to eat, right? Now that's interesting. Our passage just said, if you will say, oh, I want to eat meat. Well, who has said that in the Torah before? The riffraff. You know, there's a terrible white rapper named Riffraff, just FYI. Who's going to feed us meat? We remember, and you have to look at this as well. You remember that the fish that we used to eat free in Egypt, the cucumbers, the melons, the leeks, the onions, and the garlic, now our gullets are shriveled and there's nothing at all, nothing but this manna to look to. All we have to eat is this crap that God's raining down from the sky. It's like, you know, God's raining down bread from the sky. Like, okay, but it gets old after a while. They want meat. Right? So that's interesting. Now, how does that shape our understanding of the idea that meat is a ta'avat nafshecha? It's a desire of your. Oh, so that reminds you of eating the tree of the fruit of the forbidden tree, and of the eruption of complaining in the desert that prompts a plague as God's response. Ooh, that's a twist, huh? I want to give Inshi a first crack at this. You had your hand up earlier. Are you still relevant?
Oh,
you are relevant, but is the question?
Well, I just wanted to say something. I just wanted to say that it's a little bit strange for me that the Torah says that God is pleased by the sin of, the sacrificed animals, because God created the animals and, wanted the animals to live as well as humans to live. But I'm also vegan, so, I have a different perspective than, most people that eat meat.
Yeah, I mean, but it's a perspective you can very well read into the Torah, right? Like, initially, God says, you and the animals can eat all of the plants and seeds that you want. That seems to be, in some ways, it's very easy to argue that's the ideal vision. That's the Garden of freaking Eden, right? Like, that's the way it's supposed to be. Just walk around eating all of the plants that you want and just enjoying. It's going to be great. And it's a direct parallel to manna. All your food is provided for you. You get everything you want. Don't worry about it. All of your vegetarian food meals will be provided for you. And then all of a sudden they're like, no, I have a ta'ava for something else. I desire something else. I desire the thing I'm not supposed to have. That's what I want, right? So now that's part of that's the valence. That's part of the charge of this passage. Okay, I think I can take Yonatan and maybe one more, maybe just Yonatan actually. I'll take Yonatan's comment and then we'll close.
Well, thank you for taking another comment from me because I really care about this.
I have a ta'ava for the comments. Like I can't help myself. Even when it makes more sense to plow forward in the class, I can't resist. I want to hear from you all.
I think that what we're seeing here, and this speaks directly to Ishia's question, is maybe eating meat is a prerogative that God has, that we do not naturally have. And when I read, God enjoys the scent of the sacrifices, God has no nose. How can God enjoy the scent? It's the fact that God commanded us to do it and we did it, just as God commanded. That's what's pleasing and comforting to God, and not the smell of the dead animal itself. And I think in my theology, in my Judaism, which is a vegetarian Judaism, it's crucial to remind myself the temple doesn't exist anymore, and we are not commanded anymore to do these things. And a lot of Jewish theologians do believe that when the temple is rebuilt, we will only offer the vegetarian sacrifices there. There will not be any more animal sacrifices when the temple is rebuilt. So I think all of these things fit, again, into this idea that I keep going back to, which is that the Torah really does not want us eating meat.
Okay, very, very beautiful and very, very sophisticated and thoughtful as always, Yonatan. Appreciate that. The one point I will quibble with is that God does not have a nose, because we know that God is erech hapayim. God's actually very long-nosed, but okay, that's for a different class. But Jewish nosed, if you will. Okay, so the last thing that I want to show you, though, is there is one more appearance of ta'ava, and it was in the book of Deuteronomy. All right, anyone? It's in the Ten Commandments, right? The second edition of the Ten Commandments. Check it out. Check it out. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. V'lo tit'aveh beit re'echa sadehu v'avdo v'amato shoro v'chamaro v'chol asher l're'echa. You shall not covet. That's the one we know. Lo tachmod. But also you shall not have a ta'ava for other people's things, for what's not in your property, all right? And yet when your boundary expands, suddenly you say, I do have a ta'ava. I do have a ta'ava. Look, by the way, at the way it's tachmod and titaveh, for those who really like the Hebrew. Look at the same language in the Garden of Eden, ta'aveh v'nechmad. There's something here, like there's something that the Torah does seem to be saying about ta'ava that isn't good. When you desire something, that's not a celebrated act. Never has been. So what does it mean that now meat is your desire and you can have it and you should and you do it as much as it? How suspicious, and we have been being suspicious of that, how suspicious should we be? I will tell you just in closing what I am, what I'm trying to do. like I said, I've been thinking about this, and I'm not like in Shia and Yonatan, though I respect that ethical position. It's not my position, but I do feel uncomfortable with like the idea that is so, in some ways, American, so kind of first world, of like eating meat at every meal, right? Like that doesn't seem right. So what I have started to try to do during this like time of spiritual preparation, and what I guess I think the Torah might want from me, is that I'm trying to eat meat only on Shabbat or holidays or some other distinct kind of celebration, right? As Lee was saying actually earlier. That's what I'm trying to do. And I had it put to the test yesterday. My brother was like, oh, I have the day off. Do you want to go to the beach? I can't go to the beach. I'm working. Well, we can come to your house and we'll order some food and we'll eat in a park together. It was so nice. And he's going to bring my niece. It was like such a joy. I get to have lunch with my brother and my niece. And my brother's like, yeah, just order from one of the kosher places. You know, I don't get to eat meat that often, right? Because he eats kosher meat. So I was like, okay. And we went to order and I was like, shoot, should I? It's my brother. Well, this is sort of a celebration, right? It's like, but what am I gonna get? What am I gonna get? Like fries? I mean, I'm ordering from the place my brother asked me to. I've already agreed. Like, I got the Impossible Burger. But it was so hard. It was not good. It was not good. But that's what I'm trying to do. We're working on ourselves. That's the point. We're working on ourselves during this period, and the Torah has something to say. The Torah has something to say to us. So let's be aware, alert. Let's look for those messages. Let's try to listen to our Torah during this season. Okay, good to see you all. See you next week on Monday. We are continuing our tour through the Mishnah and the Yom Kippur service. And then, of course, we'll be back here Wednesday next week. Everybody have a good day.